went looking for him after the flood, and turns out that the flood had washed all the gold down out of the mountains, and it was lying around everywhere, and it was pure. It didn't need any refining. So there's very interesting, intertwinings of the stories that we know from the Bible and these Sumerian ones. In Genesis, God's talking about the rivers, and the first one is Pishon or something, and that's where the gold is. It says so right there. Why does God care about gold? And the gold is good, he says.
And now on with the video.
And I thank every single one of you for joining our conversation. I'm with Ted Marchildren, the developer of Omega Rotary Garden. This is an innovation that we need to be able to bring indoor vertical agriculture to feed our planet.
And I'm up in the wee hours in the morning. I think it was the first year that CNN was on the air, and Southern Ontario, and I'm watching this image of the whatever it is. It's flying over the surface, and it's analyzing these different shapes. And there's a counter at the bottom that's calculating the odds of natural occurrence. Well, it hits those pyramids, and it hits that face, and the odds of natural occurrence, according to the bottom of the screen, were 0. It took from then until just not too long ago, I read, I think it was the Lost Book of Enki, where I realized, who's that face on Mars finally is. They had banished him there, I think, because he lost the fight. He lost the wrestling match to Anu, and then Anu's like got a foot on his chest, and he lets the guy up, and he jumps up and bites his junk off. And but that kills him slowly, and that happened on Mars apparently. And then they set up the gold processing, and then after the flood, all their operations are under mud and water, and they're all screwed. But Cain, who slew Abel, instead of because they were the first two born of Adam, they're wanting the humans to multiply, right? They want to use them working in the garden, working in the mines. And so they didn't kill him, they banished him, and the mark of Cain, which I found, I could never figure out what the heck that was. They all had these fabulous beards, so the mark of Cain was beardless. And they sent him basically to the Americas, and then they went looking for him after the flood, and turns out that the flood had washed all the gold down out of the mountains, and it was lying around everywhere, and it was pure. It didn't need any refining. So now the 300 that are on Mars are out of a job, and they end up coming to Earth because Marduk Ra is marrying one of the daughters of Adam, and that's when they all took Earth wives, and those are the fallen ones. So there's very interesting intertwinings of the stories that we know from the Bible and these Sumerian ones. In Genesis, God's talking about the rivers, and the first one is Pishon or something, and that's where the gold is. It says so right there. Why does God care about gold? And the gold is good, he says.
Yeah, and you look at the Vatican, and you see all of the gold objects laying around, from the gold crosses to the gold goblets, and everything had to be gold assimilated into the Vatican, and it just goes on, this reverence for gold, and it always seems to be stockpiled in a few places. And if you look across archaeological digs, pure gold, like you say, just laying on top of things. Who's in charge of all the gold objects that have been found and plundered for the last 500 years and all the quote unquote archaeological digs? It's in the hands of like 3 institutions. Again, It's just nothing more than a consolidation of gold objects into the hands of a few, probably be delivered to the masters at some point.
Well, they show up. They were apparently here, according to Sitchin. Last time they were here was about between 500 and 550 AD. That's when you can see this planet from Earth. and it's when it's there's a certain point in its orbit where they call it Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. So that's what the cross is all about.
And let me toss in something real quick. You mentioned that date there. 535 to 540 AD was the largest volcanic eruptions in the last 8,000 years on our planet. So think about that for a second. You're telling me that exact same date range, but maybe that gravitational pull from, maybe it was a real close passing that caused extreme volcanism. They can name at least 3 volcanoes that blocked out the sun for years, and the sulfur dioxide was so heavy that it poisoned people across the northern hemisphere. To the point it set society back, and I think there was something 70% loss of life globally because of those events of the volcanism. That was 535 to 540 AD. And that's the end of the Roman Empire too, in earnest. Okay, they debased the currency, whatever. But the end of the Roman Empire, the last we ever heard of the Roman Empire with any type of, say, pull or push on world events at the point, it was right at that same time. And, Aksum down in around Ethiopia and, say, Yemen, they took over the gold standard and the gold weights and measures of coinage after the Roman Empire collapsed, because they had the frankincense and different aromatic spice trade all the way through the Middle East up into Europe. And they took over the coinage and were the number one most valued coin because it was down, they didn't debase, and it was down to the measurements that it should have been again. Interesting, that date that you just mentioned there.
Well, I mentioned, I think, or maybe I got it wrong, but I mentioned BC, 5 to 550 BC.
Oh, this is 535 AD.
So, but when you say that the planet crossing caused the trouble, apparently this planet is 10 times the size of Earth. So it wreaks some havoc when it comes in, because it comes in early legend, even for those guys, that planet smacked into whatever planet was where the asteroid belt is now.
Tiamat.
So it comes right inside the solar system in the inner planets and wreaks havoc. And it was apparently calculated to knock the ice off of Antarctica. And that was the beginning of the flood, the biblical flood. Now, I think all the excess water actually came from the inside of the planet. And because of the electrical arcing that happened between those two things, I think you had something like a magneto pump, which pumped all the water out of the inside. And then after it got far enough away, I think that water drained back inside, because where did the water come from? Where did it go? Apparently, there's 3 times the water on the inside of the planet as the outside of the planet. So that's all I can think of. I never read about that anywhere, in a whole sense, but picking from this and picking from that. And if somebody said to me, somebody did ask me not that long ago, "Oh, you're so smart, where'd all the water go?" And when I answered them, they were like, "Huh, okay."
Well, no, you have something there, because Andy Hall up at the Electric Universe and the Thunderbolts Project, Andy Hall talks about electric geology, which would have sculpted the Grand Canyon. And I myself have seen with my own eyes, the Adriatic Sea looked very much like a plasma bolt had ripped through, and then the ionized wind pushed out the debris in an exact pattern of every boulder that was along the Adriatic Sea was the exact same size. And as you headed inland, the boulder size became smaller and smaller. Every boulder was the exact same size and weight pretty much as you went through. I was so shocked by the topography as I was coming out of the Adriatic going back inland. But you're right. If the water came out, it would have absorbed back in or fallen and found its way back in until it refilled in the earth too. And those earth cracks that would have occurred at that time, where that water could have emanated from, once the water seeped back in, those earth cracks would have sealed themselves back up again. And I think we're coming into another era of that with this global liquefaction event, earth cracks, crustal slips, etc., as we come into this magnetic coupling in 2024. So is another flood possible? Yes, but I call it a mud flood or a global liquefaction event, where we're going to have water spewing out from the earth. And we're already seeing this in so many places in the last 2 months across the planet right now. You're right. There's way more water in the Earth's crust than there is above on the planets, and all the rivers, Great Lakes, and oceans combined, there's 3x more in the crust.
There's some of the Sitchin writings of the Sumerian stuff that they claim that the realm of Hades and things like that, that was South Africa, but I don't see any reason why it wouldn't have been the inside. I think we're stuck on the outside of the spaceship. And if you're on the inside, then it's going to be this archetype of abundance. You've got the fire inside the movement. However, there has been cosmic rays detected coming out of Antarctica. So I'm thinking, well, how do you get that?
I'd seen those same reports, and I was asking the same thing. Was there some sort of crustal split, and then what's considered the core was emanating some sort of energy resonance that they can only explain it as cosmic rays? Think about a different type of energy that's unknown to us, that's emanating from the crust outward. As a catch-all, you could just say it's cosmic rays. Would you really try to explain it to the masses that, well, there's this different kind of energy, we didn't know the core was different, and by the way, this crust just split open in Antarctica, and those energy particles are spilling out, but they're not really the gamma rays or any kind of rays that we understand. They're not protons or something different, but keep going and paying your taxes. and keep saving for your retirement. How off base would that be? Though it's a cosmic ray event.
Well, the inner earth, the Buddhists have a thing on that. Tibetans, Lhasa is apparently a way to get in. Right now I'm reading the second book over again from the Earth Chronicles, and it's the one about Stairway to Heaven. And so you got all the quest for immortality and the fountain of youth and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going through that kind of rereading all that stuff. So what if you have long life and you're living outside, but every couple hundred years you get whacked, whatever, all these different things that are going on. I say it's like if you're a bug on the windshield, if you're on the inside of the windshield or you're on the outside of the windshield, which is your preference? I'd much rather be on the inside of the windshield.
Especially on a freezing cold day where it's 40 degrees below zero outside and you have that nice toasty heater on the inside, right? Grand solar minimum.
Even if it's raining, somebody turns on the wipers, that's the end of you.
Oh, now you're being vindictive, man. Let me be on the windshield undisturbed. Nope. You can't grow your own food. You can't create your own electricity for your own house with a magnetic motor. How dare you?
This is the challenge that I find, David. Focus in people's attention, because there really is there's a lot of distractions, and there's a lot of bread and circus, as they say.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output. But very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine.
This is the uphill battle that we have, and we don't have a whole lot of time. Sadly, we don't have a whole lot of time. You've been sounding the call for probably, a couple, 2-3 years now. I don't know how old your channel is, but it's got to be at least 2 or 3 years, perhaps even more. So you've been in front of this for quite some time, but it's just now. For as long as you've been putting out this information, great information, I recommend people to your channel all the time. You're giving out great information. And even just now, with all the work that you've been doing, John Casey and many others, we're just now starting to see it barely creep into the mainstream. It's way too late. It's way too late.
Yeah, I would agree. It is too late. But I've been doing the channel since late October in 2014 when I did my first couple videos.
Wow, it's been that
then,
long, huh?
Yeah, but back then I would do like one every 10 days. I would do like 3 or 4 a month maybe. And I tell you what, the amount of ridicule and just the ridiculous comments and a gamut of things that I've received in these years talking about something so simple as, hey, there's a possible other explanation that we're going to go through a cycle, and instead of global warming that's happening, it's probably going to cool based on past historical cycles. And I knew a lot of information coming from our satellites are showing that, hey, oh, the sun is going to repeat something. It's behaving a little differently. It's given me a thick skin, really, because if anybody could walk in my shoes for just a few minutes and see the things I've experienced, not only at work where I had to quit a job because of this thing, and it was the point where you either quit your channel or you quit this job, and I quit the job, of course. I'm not going to quit the channel. But then at the same time, you know, that's just one part of it. But then the amount of overwhelmingly positive comments, especially this last 2 years, I mean, whether it's hitting the mainstream media or not, people are becoming more and more aware. And what I've noticed since the inception of the channel, the beginning of it, at that time it was a lot of negative because everybody was just so heavily indoctrinated in CO2 and was still warming a little bit. But since these last couple of years, temperatures are dropping and there's been these extreme weather events, which were predicted during the change of the jet streams and weakening magnetosphere, increasing cosmic rays. A lot more. I rarely get negative comments anymore. I really very rarely get them anymore. But in the beginning, it was a trudge and to get through. You know, at some points I was like, geez, I don't even know. Should I continue this channel here? This is a bunch of hate speech and just junk coming through. And then a few others told me, no, man, you're over the target. That's why you're getting the flack. You need to continue the message. If you believe it, you got to continue it. So I'm glad I did, because it's done two things for me. First, it's given me the heads up and to look in the crystal ball and really, you know, be able to help people, and including my family and myself and friends, understand these changes that are coming, because they're a little freaked out right now because what I was talking about a few years ago is here now. And they're like, whoa, you said all that stuff was going to happen and now it's happening. What do you see in the next couple of years? And I'm like, you know, you don't want to know, really. You don't want to know. I mean, we can talk about it, but you don't want to know, truly. It's a reset. I mean, it's a reset. Like, we're going to go back into pioneer lifestyle living, kind of a reset. Maybe because of a solar flare, maybe not, but just because of the divisional infighting between everybody on the planet here, you know? It's race, economics, belief system, it's you're leftist, you're rightist, you're whatever you are, there's somebody completely 100% 180 against you with, like, it's not even, nobody has a conversation anymore, and that's the problem. Everybody just screams. I try to initiate conversations, but people always like to scream when I like to talk. It's interesting. And the distractions that you mentioned, you know, they're going to get wilder. They're going to get crazier. This is how they're going to keep you distracted from the rising food prices and the real reasons for it. Everything is going to be Hollywood-esque times 10. The fires that we experienced in California, not myself personally, but I saw, you know, on the news feeds, etc. I mean, so much news time was devoted to that, and like the camera angles, and it was as wild as any Hollywood disaster movie you've ever seen. But then they added the real human element where they like pulled your emotions in, and they should be too, because those were real people affected by these events. So this is an example of the increase in distraction of Hollywood-esqueness. I would imagine probably something going to try to impeach Trump. I'm going to say in the mid-2019, just to try to get that whole Hollywood-esque, because 2019, when the harvest season comes in, those non-believers out there will quickly be turned into believers, because when you're looking at 10, 20, 30% jumps in the futures prices just because lack of crops in every zone across the planet. Australia is going into a mega drought. They're going to be down under, 2 million tons this year. Now, you got to think about that. Australia used to be a major exporter. They used to produce like 12 million tons of grain. They're a major exporter, but this year they need to import. Okay. You got to think about the push and pull around the planet. South Africa is completely offline due to the politics. Now they're importers, and they used to export to the rest of Africa. So those northern African nations, now their food prices are up again. Now the riots are starting again, but it's not because of government, suppression anymore. It's just because food prices are rising. So where are those countries going to get their food from, their grains from? Because Russia's down, Europe's down, United States was down, hard red winter wheat. Oh my gosh, should have seen the crush on that this year. Billions and billions and billions of dollars lost in Canadian crops. So if the exporters, such as Australia and South Africa, are now importers, this is going to throw a whole cog in the wheels here. The mechanism is going to freeze up somewhere where people just aren't going to get. And if they do get, it's going to cost them way more because there's premiums already out on all the... I know it's harvest season now, so if you're looking at the futures prices, some of them are coming down. It's harvest season. You got a glut of whatever's being harvested. Wait a few more months until that's all moved through the supply chain and see what happens with the prices. As soon as they go up again, they're going record. So this political instability, and they're going to all cover it in a Hollywood, Bollywood-esque bread and circuses ultra fest as we move into 2019, 2021. And when people start fighting on the streets for food and the army's brought out and martial laws declared, etc., in cities and police state is in full working order, at that point, I don't know where they're going to go because at that point, it'll be more of a, I don't know, how Hollywood-esque it can get, James. I'm not sure how far do you think they can push the envelope before people go, whoa, 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 stop. At that point, I don't know how far you have to push people to make them go to that and say stop. Because once everybody says stop, it stops.
No, it does. We have a lot more power than we think. California is the breadbasket of the nation, right? Isn't that where most all of the large majority of crops and stuff are grown? I don't know the percentage, but a lot of stuff comes from California. Right. And they're burning it out, man. And it looked to me like it was not a doctored video, but I've seen more than one, and one very, very convincing video, David, where it looked like there was some rays or something, some directed energy weapons coming from the sky into the ground, igniting stuff. I sent it over to a few people with the video, and if I could pull it back up again, I would. Sent it over to a few people to look at it because I looked at it a few times and went, man, if this is a fraud, this is really a brilliant fraud. And they thought it was real too. Now, I interviewed Paul Preston, my friend Paul Preston. I'm not sure if you know Paul, but he lives right out there, and right out there in California. He was right in Paradise, did a couple of broadcasts from there. We talked about the houses, like on a street. There'd be, a house not damaged, house not damaged, house not damaged, a house burned out. Then next to it, house not damaged, house not damaged. And like 2 and 3 and 4 streets in a row, there would be 4 or 5 houses that were perfectly standing, looking like nothing ever happened. And right in the middle of it, there'd be a house like burned down to the ground, like to ashes. But the trees around the house didn't burn, or the houses around it. So something's going on, David, with this. If we switch gears a little bit here, I don't know if you've done research and studied this, but there is something going on with this directed energy weapon. Like you talked about a year ago, we talked about axles on cars melting and rims melting. And like the point I made with that interview with Paul Preston, and we're just using round numbers, I'm not using the actual numbers, but if it takes 1,000 degrees for metal to melt and wood only burns at 550, it's just a math equation. The wood, and as I said, these aren't the real numbers, but generally speaking, the wood is not burned hot enough to melt the steel. Something with this California fires, there's something going on with these directed energy weapons. And, I wouldn't even have to see the directed energy weapons, but I see the homes that are burned out in neighborhoods, and none of the plants or trees or anything around it's burned out. I mean, did you see those photos, David? And what's your thoughts? This is Revolution Radio, right? So I've spoken about much deeper conspiracies than this. What do you think about this whole directed energy weapon thing? Do you see it the same way, or am I just a fruitcake? Or both? Maybe I'm a fruitcake too. You never know.
I think we would need to talk to Mr. Tesla and Mr. Marconi and bring them into the conversation to have this understanding of directed energy weapons. It's not something new. It's not as if they just made a directed energy weapon and it's like, oh, state-of-the-art technology 2017, 18. No way. Patents for this stuff were almost a century ago. Although with our new types of electronics, we can do a much better job at what we can create as an end product, but the mechanisms still remain the same. There's a finite amount of workings in the universe, and plasma and all these other energy drivers, and how atoms and molecules move, and a vibrational frequency. There's only a certain range of frequencies. You can't create new frequencies. There's a set range. So we're just really, you talked about cycles. We're coming back to cycles again. I mean, you want to talk about the conspiracy. We should be talking about free energy and these types of what is now directed energy weapons is the same technology that could be used for free energy. Now, if you're going to use it to start a fire, I'm sure you can use it to boil water. I'm sure you can use it to split atoms. I'm sure you could use it to do hydrolysis. There's so many other applications for this where we wouldn't have to pay for power as long as we live. I mean, you take a look here. I was doing a little bit of study on this. It's off Principia Scientifica International, and it's talking about anti-gravitics. Otis Carr, C-A-R-R, and the anti-gravity technologies that he had back in the 1950s to use for electrical generation. And he was arrested, and all of his workings were confiscated because he didn't want to sell it. He didn't want to turn it into a weaponized usage. So again, here we go back 1950s, and we're already talking about anti-gravity technologies. Now think about that. If you could make a train weightless, you could make your car just weigh a few pounds, how much less energy would we use? But then if we coupled it with what you're talking about, directed energy weapons, they don't have to be directed in such a point that it actually melts rock. What if you diffused it where it was enough to propel something? So when we start to get into this directed energy weapon, I'm right there with you. I know they exist, but they also exist for other purposes, like free energy that we could be having, instead of a lot of people using their waking moments to get some crappy job they don't want to be at, to get some green dollars so they can continue to pay for their house, for their electricity, for the gasoline they use in their cars, or diesel for their trucks. And the high-priced foods that we don't grow in our own yards, and all the just-in-time delivery chain that's running on all the energy that we're consuming across the planet to make this whole thing run. We could do it for almost free or nothing if we use the same exact thing that they weaponized and turn it into good for humanity. That's where the real conspiracy is. And yes, these directed energy weapons, James, we talked about this exactly a year ago. Same scenario, same images, things melting and 2 feet away. Vinyl replacement siding didn't even melt, yet 2 feet or 3 feet to the left, rock melted. Come on, man. There's something way wrong with those where plastic doesn't melt literally feet away from where rocks and metal had liquefied. Or I should say the reading between the lines of how we can use the same technology for good or evil.
Well, I'm going to throw this out here since we're talking about conspiracies. Well, this is not a conspiracy, but I don't know the last part. Of course, you probably are aware that about Tesla. You mentioned Tesla, Trump's uncle. I want to say, I don't think his name was Fred. Maybe his dad's name is Fred. I remember Trump's uncle was the one that was in charge. I think he worked for the government, a government agency. He was in charge of collecting all of the information from Tesla's laboratories after his death, which was taken and really confiscated by the federal government. I don't know all of it was, but that's the story anyway. That's historically speaking, that's the story. So you'll wonder, it's of course been bannered about the Twitter sphere that perhaps Trump has the free energy, and as part of his making America great again, and putting a dagger in the heart of the deep state, is going to release that technology. Now, I of course don't know. I do know the part where his uncle certainly was. This is confirmed by numerous sources that his uncle was involved in that whole thing with Tesla. Whether Trump's going to release the free energy or not, I don't know. But I think that would probably, if he was going to do it, I would think that right now in history, David, would be about the best time he could probably do it, because if we could somehow harness that free energy like he's talked about, that the technology, the patents have been available. If we can utilize that right now, that would really be a helpful feature, to say the least, to be able to help pull us through this grand solar minimum. What say you about that?
Just a quick point on that. If we were to have access to free energy at the moment, the dire predictions for billions and billions of people to die starving, cannibalizing each other, disease, and just outright violence to stay alive another day could be avoided. Because if we had free energy, we would have the energy to heat buildings, to grow food indoors. We would have the free energy to run pumps as long as we want for water. We could filter it. We could recirculate it. No problem. We'd have the light for all the LEDs. Even if you used like CFL or even old bulbs that consumed an enormous amount of power, wouldn't matter because it's free. The water, we could, you sterilize that. How about refrigeration after post-harvest? I mean, refrigerators take an enormous amount of power to run, but if it was free, it wouldn't matter because your food costs would get driven down. What about the storage, longer-term food storage? What about packing it during the packaging process? How much, electricity or power does a factory use to run this? And how about the shipping itself? If we had free power, we could move this stuff across the planet or across the regional region. Having free energy in terms of electricity and also fuels that could allow us to do all these things for nothing, literally nothing. And we would be able to grow food for an entire world so easily. The only constraint right now is, you talked about the investment capital in and also the running costs out. Because currently to grow, whatever you would do indoors, it's going to cost you more money at the point right now because you can still get things more cheaply. But if all your power was free, that would be a completely different ballgame. You would come way underpriced with the indoor grown stuff than you would outdoors at the moment, because fertilizers, I don't know how you could, if free energy, you still got to produce a thing out of the fertilizer. So, there's some things that do require physical substance still. Oil is going to be needed as in a physical. Energy is one thing, but plastics and fertilizers and these kind of things, medicines, etc., they need physical substance. But in terms of driving the whole thing and like making it work, free energy, our world, that problem is solved. In my last episode, I was talking something very similar to what I've been talking with James White here on today's program, founder and editor of NorthwestLibertyNews.com and also the Northwest Liberty News YouTube channel. We were talking about the narrative shifting, how the media is going to try to control what you see or how you view reality as we move from this point forward through high food prices, crop losses, extreme weather changes, and now the global corporate media coming out talking about ice age, mini ice age, grand solar minimum, global cooling. And I'm going to read you a news headline here to start off with. We're over on electroverse.net today. Global warming protests called off in Russia. Too cold, minus 47 degrees Fahrenheit. And they're telling us it's all about it's too hot. We got to cool everything. And this whole ridiculous, and talking about government intervention into society and populations as the food prices get too expensive and the basic necessities through food assistance programs won't be met for a basic portion at the lower population of the economic strata of each country of the world. Not a problem. But now they're talking about spraying sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere to cool the planet. Now, what I signal here is global media is coming out saying mini ice age, planet's going to cool, global cooling. At the same time, they're saying sulfur dioxide spraying in the atmosphere. So I'm going to see an intersection here somewhere in the very near future, like 1 or 2 years, and they'll be like, well, we were actually doing it in secret, but we didn't want to tell you because we didn't want to scare you. But look, it worked. We were able to cool the planet down, and they're going to try to take credit for it. I can already see the writing on the wall. And those will go, oh, yay, we need to keep spraying. It's still CO2. I don't believe it's anything from the sun. Now, wait a second. Sulfur dioxide, I thought we were trying to stop sulfur dioxide, acid rain, and now they want to spray it in the atmosphere. That's way different than the nanometals from geoengineering to ionize the atmosphere at a greater capacity to bounce radio signals for the military. Two different animals, A and B. James, what do you think about that?
Here's the thing that I think that we have going for us here, David. And I wanted to say earlier, when I said earlier that it's too late, I wasn't trying to be negative. I meant it's too late for the mainstream media to have let us all know about this, which shouldn't surprise any of us. But I think I think the good thing that we have going for us here is the narrative. I mean, there's a lot of positives. You talked about it earlier. Even for people like us to come up with alternative news programs, there's even opportunities out there for things like that. Because I was going to say it earlier, the thing we have going for us, David, is they don't have the grip on information, and they don't control the information narrative like they used to. They still control a lot of it, don't get me wrong. But it's hard to control like independent people like you and myself and many others that are just going out there independently expressing what they've experienced or what they currently see or what's going on in their town. You can't stop. You can't, unless you shut everything down, which I know they're trying to. And I'd like to talk, if we can, a little bit about it. I'm not sure if you're following the news over here. I don't think they have the same grip on the narrative as they used to, David. So I believe that they're still going to try to spread lies and false information, but I just don't know if they're going to be as successful as they were before. This is really, we really are going through, and as I said, there's some positive things. I believe we're going through a great awakening right now in a lot of ways. How that's going to manifest itself in relation to the grand solar minimum, I don't know. I wish I did, but I do know that we are not, I think, as blind, at least a lot of us, as we were before, to really the lies and the fabrications of the establishment. What do you think about that? Do you think the same?
Well, I think a lot of people are awakened, but they don't speak. They're biting their tongue because they see the viper's nest that they're in around. I think there's a lot more awareness and awakened mind out there than is let on to, just because you can kind of see the direction of everything where they're trying to compile now lists of banned speech for universities, etc. Hey, if you don't agree with me, because I say global cooling, that should not be a trigger hate speech word that should be banned across the university. Just because you don't agree with me, let's have a debate. Let's talk about it. No. So they just got to silence it. This is the new thing. There's no longer talking about anything. It's just pure silencing and removing the threat at any cost, whether it be jobs, personal ad hominems, wherever they can find somebody on the net and then go after their employer. So I think people have really taken a quick understanding that, you just don't speak your mind these days too much, although you may know much, much more, just because of the blowback, if you will, that's out there off the new socialist/communist regime that's trying to form itself in the United States. And for those of you out there listening, I used to live in China. I worked in China. That was one of my very first jobs after I moved over to Asia. I went to university in China for a year, studied Chinese, and then I got a job as a factory acquisition agent. I tell you what I see in the United States after reading, I was a real big fan of history, ancient history. I love it. That's one of the main reasons I went to China, was for the ancient history. I wanted to learn about, and that's what brought me in. Hey, there's a lot of cycles happening here. I understood the cycles before I understood the grand solar minimum, but then it overlapped and I already had the base layer there for China.